do you say, everybody? And welcome back to the show. It's time for the second episode of the MLB Baseball Scout with former Cubs scouting director and one of the baseball greats in scouting, Mr. Tim Wilken. I'm Mick Gillispie. Great to see all you guys, and we appreciate it. Make sure that you follow us at Cubs Baseball Channel. It's the new channel. A lot of you guys have done it. We got to get to 100 subscribers so that this show can be live. And then we need to get 1,000 subscribers so that we can take it to the next level. But it was, Tim, it was great. The first show I thought went really well.
Yes, very much so. And I got a fair amount of positive feedback from a few of my friends and stuff who turned into the show, and they enjoyed it very much.
Yeah, it was fun. It was fun getting to know you and, and kind of getting things started. So right now, this is the start of the second month of the baseball season. I'm obviously not at my home studio. I'm actually at Smoky Stadium, a place that you know well. And the Cubs AA team is in first place. That's who I broadcast games for tonight. We're going to have a Gold Glove presentation for the number one Cubs prospect, Pete Crow-Armstrong. Are you familiar at all with PCA?
A little bit.
Yeah.
I got to see him as an amateur the summer of his draft year, or right before the next draft year. So very good baseball player and pretty well-rounded overall ability.
Yeah, look, I'll tell you what I like about him is that he's got really, really good hand-eye coordination, amongst the best of players that I've ever seen. And he kind of reminds me of Bryce Harper light. Look, I'm not saying he's going to be an MVP and hit 30 home runs, but that same, left-hander with just this amazing ability to make contact with balls, still has some holes to work through. Obviously, soft stuff down is something that a lot of lefties deal with here, and we're seeing that. But the outfield, defensively, he's as good as I've seen. And, I remember Sam Fold, who was an excellent outfielder for this team. Albert Elmore Jr. was a really good outfielder. But what PCA does is he makes those amazing catches and doesn't really have to dive. He's able to kind of see the ball and show up where it's at. And there's just, this. It's like these guys work on it, but there's also this natural ability that they have.
It's innate for sure. And if I had it to do over again about scouting reports on a player, and this would probably relate to Pete, and I think that possibly there should be a category in there for baseball player.
Mm-hmm.
And they're generally not on any reports. You put that in your notes at the end of the report, but I don't think it does the real good baseball players. I don't think it notes it enough unless it's in a grade form, and he would probably be at least a 7, maybe pushing an 8 on the 2 to 8 scale.
Yeah, look, it's funny that you say that because I see the same exact thing. The guy's ability to just play the game, right? He stole a base in one game. The ball got away from the second baseman, didn't go very far, but he just felt that the ball got away and got to third, and then he scored on a pitch that was in the dirt in that same inning that barely left home plate. But he just, like you said, man, he just knows this game. He can play it. He does things to help you win. There's been guys that were the exact opposite of that. You remember Junior Lake. Here's a guy that has all of these abilities, right? Like he's a tool guy. But when you put him on the baseball field, former Cubs prospect, guy I liked a lot as a person, but he just did things every night that lose games for you, And then there's guys like PCA who I think you're exactly right. Like, it's the exact opposite. Like, the guy just does a couple things that help you win.
That baseball player doesn't get noticed enough. I was having a talk earlier today with Wayne Krifsky, who was general manager of the Reds and also spent a long time in the Minnesota Twins organization. And we were talking about baseball players, and two that came to mind that Pete might have a chance to be a better ball player than both of them, but it was Kevin Kiermaier and Pilar, and they really help their clubs in so many ways. They can steal a base, they can play a true center field. They're good baseball players, and I don't know if the grading system for most of the clubs does not allow for using that as a grade and a key tool, because that's the carryover for those guys versus the all tooled up guy that can apply it, unlike Junior Lake. But uh, that baseball player will go a long ways and play a long time. And Pilar, I believe, was a 32nd rounder by the Blue Jays. The same year, Kiermaier was picked the round before in the 31st round. They both now have played 11 years, parts of 11 years in the major leagues. Very productive players, but it's because of their baseball ability. And there was a reason why they went later, but I think that was 2011, if I'm right, that both of them were drafted. And Pete Crow-Armstrong has a chance to even be a better player possibly than those guys.
Yeah, look, when you make trades, and the Cubs traded Javi Baez to the Mets to get him, right, at the deadline, the year that they traded all of their World Series guys away. And I think that's going to be the best of the trades that they made. Teams aren't willing, Tim, to give up the guys that are right on the doorstep of the major leagues like they used to in those trades, right? So you got to go back to younger players, right? You got to be like low A guys or rookie league guys to make these deals now. You've seen that change over the course of the last 10 years.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. 30, 40 years ago, you could get those guys, but also they were really tough to get, and you would have to go into those lower A leagues or rookie leagues to get those kind of guys. And when I was over with Toronto in my early years, that's how we got Fred McGriff as part of a deal, and he was in the Gulf Coast League for his second time.
Really?
Yeah.
Let's talk Fred McGriff. He's a former Smoky as well, so there's a lot of love here. I'm going to tell you, for years I didn't understand why McGriff wasn't in the Hall of Fame. He was a winner at the big league level. The Braves don't get their World Series with all the great pitching without the crime dog. He's got one of the best nicknames of all time. He's a handful short of 500 home runs, and that seemed to be something that held him back, like the difference between 500 home runs and 494 or whatever it is he's got. But you saw him firsthand. You were part of bringing him to Toronto. He ended up being a cornerstone on the World Series teams that they had. Talk about Fred McGriff and what made him a great player as a young guy before he got into before he got into majors, and then what happened when he got into majors to be one of the top players in the game.
Well, we got Fred, I believe it was 1981 was his draft year. He was a 9th round pick out of Jefferson High School in Tampa. And Fred, he went through some trials and testing periods. Even as an amateur, he was cut his sophomore year in high school. And then he played. The Yankees took him in the 9th round. I think he only got 50 or 60 at bats his first year in the Gulf Coast League. And then the second year, he went back to the Gulf Coast League, and we had 2 scouts that had seen him. One was our manager of our Gulf Coast League team, Epi Guerrero, and then that fall he was playing for the Yankees in an instructional league, and we had a scout from Texas named Jim Hughes. And Jim, they were both the recommending guys on Fred McGriff, and kind of an interesting trade between Pat Gillick and George Steinbrenner, who was the owner at the time. Pat had previously worked with the Yankees with George, and he kind of knew George a little bit. And I guess the deal had come down. It was a 2-for-2, and there was 6 minor leaguers that a list that George had given to Pat, and so Pat kind of knew George was a little bit of a reactionary, so he says, "Okay, I've got a couple things to do. Let's talk in a couple 2-3 hours, and take McGriff off the list." Well, it's reported to have been said by George. He calls back about 30 minutes later and he says, "If you don't take McGriff, we don't have a deal." So I think Pat kind of baited him a little bit. And that's how Fred became a Blue Jay. And Fred, there's a drive in Fred that a lot of people don't see because he's so encompassing as a human being. But underneath all that, he was an extremely driven player. And the other thing, Mick, and it's never brought up too much, but 94 was the strike year. Mm-hmm. And Fred missed 44 games that year because of the strike. And then he missed another 20 games the preceding year because they only had 144 or 142 game schedule.
Right. Good
point. So Fred misses 60 games in the middle of his prime. I think he could have hit those 7 home runs that he needed for 500 if that was your barometer for a Hall of Famer. And possibly maybe because he ended up with about 4 or 5 clubs, that might have deterred. People go by familiarity, and Fred was on 4 or 5 clubs. I mean, he was with San Diego, Atlanta, Toronto. There was a couple
Tampa Bay. He played for Tampa Bay.
That's right. Yeah. So thanks. I needed that.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that took away from the writers, and if 500 was the barometer, then okay. What about those 64 games that he missed? I think he could have easily hit 7 home runs in 64 games, especially in his prime. So I don't know if that was taken into account, but what a wonderful.
What do you think the knock was? Sorry, Tim. What do you think the knock was on him? Because I wasn't a professional at this when he played. So I just watched him as a fan, and always, being a kid in Baltimore. Would see him against the Orioles, and it seemed like he was always coming up with a big hit. And then when he went to the Braves, I was a fan of that Braves team. I mean, I've been a Cubs fan my whole life too, but I've been a baseball fan. I remember when he went to the Braves and thinking this was great because they were on TV all the time. But what was the knock against him? I mean, what were people saying? Hey, you know what? This guy's not a Hall of Famer because of this. It took him a long time to get in.
Yeah, and I'm not sure. I guess I'd have to spend some time with some of the writers that vote on it, but I'm just speculating. Naturally the 500 home run barometer, and
which is what I thought.
I thought he was definitely better than adequate as a defender.
Mm-hmm. Could he run the bases?
Well, Fred wasn't real quick, but he wasn't super slow either.
Right. He wasn't a bad base runner.
He could run a little bit, but I mean, he wasn't going to light you up with stolen bases, and that category wasn't going to get checked off by the writers. So, and I think the ballots, if you go back and study the ballots, they were really full during those time periods he was eligible.
Right.
So I'm not using that as an excuse, but I think there's quite a few guys, and maybe if you look at that time period versus other time periods of induction, I don't know if those guys had as many players to compete against. And Fred just kind of had the bad luck thing going there. because there was a fair amount of guys inducted, and I'm going to bet that he was kind of, hurt by that as far as the voting went. So, another time period, maybe 10 years from now, if he were in it, he might be in by the second ballot or third ballot.
Right. Now,
So-
eventually, he got in with the Veterans Committee. They voted
Yeah.
him in, so he got in. But yeah, I see what you're saying. Like, a lot of that has to do with who else is on the ballot at the time. But I never thought of Fred McGriff as anything but a Hall of Famer. So I was kind of surprised that it didn't happen sooner. How about you?
I'm a big Fred McGriff fan. I get to see Fred a couple times every year, and sometimes even more than that. He's done a few things for high schools over in this county. He used to live over in Tampa, and he would come over and just he went over to 2 different high schools I know of and showed up and helped out. And he's a wonderful, engaging person. Probably one of my 5 favorites as a human being. So if I were a writer, I probably would have had him on the first ballot out of just being prejudiced. So,
yeah, right. I gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, what'd you think of those Tom Amansky videos that he used to be in? Did you learn some defensive skills from those?
No, not really. But I know he got some grief and from some of his teammates and
I'm
stuff.
sure.
And you'd always see those things run late at night, especially in the Florida area. So we get to see quite a few of those Amansky commercials.
Hanging out with Tim Wilken, the MLB Baseball Scout podcast. Whether you're listening to us across all the platforms that we're on or you're watching on our YouTube channel, please go to YouTube at Cubs Baseball Channel and subscribe. We need to get 100 subscribers so that we can do this show live. And then we need 1,000 so that we can really take this to the next level. But we appreciate all of you guys. We heard from people all over the country on the show. And one of the things that we want to do eventually is have some of our friends, people that are still, scouting, people that are, in the business, we're in the business, to jump on with us. Also, we want you guys to ask questions. If you got something that, that you'd like to ask Tim about, maybe you're a scout and, you want to, kind of pick Tim's brain on a subject, shoot us an email. Would love to hear from you, or just, put the question right in the sidebar on the YouTube channel, and we'll try to get to those, as we roll here. But we appreciate all you guys being a part of our show. Well, let's talk Toronto Blue Jays. Fred McGriff he was part of the back-to-back World Series teams, right?
We had traded him right. It was during the winter meetings with San Diego, and we sent Fred and Tony Fernandez to San Diego. It was one of the bigger trades in quite some time for Robbie Alomar and Joe Carter.
Oh, that's right. That
was the December of 91, I believe.
So he missed it. That's right. He missed it. And
he got in some playoff games with us, but he never got to see the final.
I think I remember one of those playoff games, and it's so long ago, but just off the top of my head, where the Blue Jays were kind of up and coming, and they played Oakland, and the A's were just like stacked. They had those huge steroids guys. Mark McGwire was a monster. Jose Canseco was a monster, and I remember Jose Canseco, if I remember correctly, hitting one like to the top of the dome in one of those games, like just like the mythical home run. Do you remember that? Was that before?
I was sitting down the third baseline, and I think Mike Flanagan was the pitcher. We had got him in a deal from Baltimore.
That's right.
And I think it was about 5 rows before it was going to hit the hotel and back. What's ironic, a few years later, Josh Phelps, who played for Knoxville or Tennessee, hit one about in the same area off of Roger Clemens. But no, that was that thing that Jose hit was extremely loud and extremely far. So I'm sure a few people got whiplash trying to
Was
hit that
that, and
thing.
that was the year before you guys went back to back, or was it a
Yeah,
couple of years before that?
it was a couple. I think it was 1990. That was the year
Okay.
Oakland played the A's.
Oh,
Oakland played the Reds in the World Series. Yeah, and then '91 we lost in the playoffs to Minnesota,
oh
and
yeah,
then
right
and
on.
then
And they
'92
won it.
and '93 we beat Atlanta and then the Phillies.
I actually have had the honor of doing this. So I'm going to ask you what it's like for you. Me at a much smaller scale, but what's it like when you get that World Series ring from the Blue Jays after all those years? Starting in '77 and then getting into scouting and being a part of this, and then finally, that first World Series ring. It had to feel like amazing to slide that on your finger.
Well, it was, and uh, you know, you look back and saw the basics of the expansion, and then on into '82, '83, where you could see our club starting to play pretty good. '85, we get to the playoffs. We had a hell of a year to start in '87, and then all of a sudden we had some real bad injuries with Ernie Wick going down and
Yeah.
Tony Fernandez. We thought we had a chance then. And then came '90. We weren't quite good enough to beat Oakland, and '91 with the Twins. And then Pat made some key acquisitions, and naturally, that trade that I alluded to earlier was a big key to our club. And the one club we had in '93, and not many people realize it, but I think it was the only time in Major League history where the 1, 2, and 3 hitters in the lineup finished 1, 2, and 3 in batting average that year.
What year was that?
That was '93. Olerud won the batting title. I think he was hitting in the 3 spot. Uh, uh, Alomar might have been leading off, and Molitor was hitting second, and they finished 1, 2, 3 in the race. So, I don't think it's ever been done prior or since.
Yeah, I remember what was it, Mookie Wilson?
Yeah.
Watching the Orioles lose to the Blue Jays in a lot of heartbreaking games back then. But all right, so I got to ask you about this trade, and then we're going to talk about a couple of the pitchers that you guys had that were the aces of the staff that you were involved with. But how do you make that trade? I mean, you give up I can't imagine these days like a team being on the verge of a World Series, and then all of a sudden you trade like superstars for some young players that at that time. Well, maybe George Bell. It was actually like a Cub, right? When he was traded to the Cubs by the Cubs early in his career, and then Robbie Alomar. I mean, from his dad. I mean, I guess you figured he would be a good player, turned into a Hall of Famer. But it's still, that's a tough trade to make. I mean, if you're wrong on that, everybody gets fired.
Well, it was kind of funny. We had the winter meetings, and I think it was the first time the winter meetings had ever been split up. It was the minor leagues had their meetings in Los Angeles, and the major league winter meetings were in Chicago. And I don't know why they split that year, but Pat Gillick walks into the room about 2 days before it's over, and he says, "Guys, what do you think about Robbie Alomar and Joe Carter for Fred McGriff? For Fred McGriff and Tony Fernandez." There's about 15 guys in the room, and unfortunately, the night before, I got sick eating some oysters, so I was laying on the couch almost prone.
And that's an excuse I use when I drink too much, by the way. That's a side note.
I wish I could have had one that night. Those oysters got to me pretty good, but I learned the lesson there. Don't eat oysters in cold weather, and that was December. But getting back to
don't eat
that,
them raw.
we got 15 guys at least in the room. scouts, front office people. And when Pat proposed the trade to the whole room, there was about 13 or 14 guys that started laughing, couldn't help themselves, and couldn't stop for a while. Well, there's only two people that didn't laugh, and I was too sick to laugh.
Right.
And we had a scout, hell of a scout named Moose Johnson.
Oh, yeah.
And,
Famous scout.
Yes. So he's sitting down. He's not laughing at all because he had the San Diego Padres as major league coverage. So he
Really?
had seen Carter and Alomar live. And Pat looks at him after everyone stopped laughing and says, Wilbur, that was his real first name. He says, Wilbur, you didn't say anything. And Wilbur's or Moose says, Pat, I'd make that deal right now. And 24 hours later, Pat made the deal the next day.
So. And the rest is history.
Joe McElvain was the GM of San Diego. Yeah, it was kind of shocked the whole world because there was Alomar being the kind of player he was, and Joe Carter naturally, and Tony Fernandez was at least a 3 or 4 time All-Star that was headed for a 3,000 hit career until he had a couple injuries.
Yeah.
And Fred McGriff, who's now a Hall of Famer, or will be here in a few months. And, it was one that kind of stunned the whole baseball world for a while. And, boy, we could score a lot of runs that next year. I mean, those first 3 hitters really set the tone. I don't know if you remember, there was a game where in the World Series that year, Toronto beat the Phillies. And I want to say they were up by 10 or 11 runs, and Toronto ended up outscoring them like 15-14 or 15-13. And those guys, it was an unreal comeback. I was up in Philly when that happened, and it just kind of stunned the fans that the Phillies had there, and that was a key to us winning that '93 World Series.
No, yeah, Mitch Wild Thing Williams and Lenny Dykstra. Yeah, I remember that.
Dalton.
Yeah. Well, let's kind of switch gears and talk about a couple of the pitchers that were on that team and a big part of it because you guys drafted these guys and developed them, and that'd be Dave Stieb and Mark Eichhorn. Both guys were, especially Stieb. I mean, he was one of the best pitchers in baseball.
Yeah. I'm going to go with Stieb first, if that's okay. And Dave Stieb, we had drafted, I believe it was 1978 in the 6th round out of Southern Illinois University. Our area guy loved him as a center fielder, very good athlete. And there's a pretty good story that goes with this. And some of it is, I don't know how to explain it, but some people were a little skeptical after we had taken Dave Stieb. So when we drafted him as a pitcher, but Dave said to the guy signing him, he says, no, I'm going out as a center fielder. I'm a much better center fielder than a pitcher.
Right.
So Bobby Maddux was there for the conversation after. And Bobby Maddux says, hey, if the guy's that strong-minded and thinks he's better, let's take it to the hitting stats too, Mick. But for Dunedin in like 78 or 9. Anyways, Bobby Maddux says he thinks he can play center field. He says, just send him to Dunedin in the Florida State League right out of Southern Illinois. And he says, don't give him a day off. Well, I think Stieb hit about 190 for the summer and kind of gassed out. And he basically says, I surrender. I'll start pitching even more. So he threw in the instructional league that year. And the following year, 1979, and this is pretty amazing if you think about it. Dave Stieb started at Dunedin. He went 5-0 that year. Then we did not have a double-A team because we were an expansion team, and that was the last club we were going to end up filling.
Right.
So they jumped Steve from Dunedin to Syracuse, and so he went to AAA, and he goes 5-2 at AAA. And then that year in the big leagues, they called him up, and he went 8-8. So that was his first full season as a pitcher, and just gave you an idea of what Dave Stieb could do. And with that dominating slider that he had, he was very fun to watch. One of the best competitors I've seen, extremely headstrong, which he used to his advantage.
Mm-hmm.
And, he was still a good athlete, but I think he made a good switch in his career from center to the mound. I think he won 185 games, maybe.
Yeah, well, look, here's the stats for him that year in 1978, where he played 35 games in the outfield, and they played him every day. 192, a home run and 9 RBIs, and so I guess that kind of convinced him that maybe maybe the pitching thing would be a good idea. And I'll tell you what's impressive, and then you'll see this a lot. 78 and 79, he was in the minor leagues. He was only in the minor leagues for 19 starts, 19 games.
Yeah. 19 games.
He went, and you're right, he went from A ball to AAA, and you said it's because you didn't even have a AA team, to the major leagues. And by the end of 79, the guy ends up 8-8 with a 4.31 ERA. And then from that point on, he was under 3. I mean, under 4 and low 3s and under 3. I mean, just some amazing years for him.
Led the league in innings pitched a couple times. I think he made about 6 all-star teams. 7, my bad.
Yeah.
And he was something else. And he had all those memorable games where he would take no hitters into the 9th inning. I think he took like his first 4 times. He finally did get that elusive no hitter, but he had such bad luck in a couple of those games, and ended up giving hits, or a couple hits in one of the games. But his competitiveness and his fire really made him the pitcher that he was, along with that devastating curveball, which hitters didn't like to mess with too much. So
yeah, well, it looks like in '92 things started to slow down for him. He was with the White Sox in '93, and then what's crazy, and I'm looking at this, I didn't know this. '94, '5, '6, and '7, he's out. He comes back in '98. And actually has a pretty decent year. He got 7-4 with a 2.78 ERA.
Yeah, he
did that in the minors, but still, I mean, that's impressive. He ended up with in the big leagues too. But I mean, just to be able to come back and do that is something. What happened? Was he injured and had to miss?
I think he had some arm problems toward the end of what was that, '93. Kind of gave that a rest for a while, and I'm not too sure what happened after that point. And then he got the itch to come back, and Gordash was all for it. He was the general manager at the time, and Dave decided to try to make a comeback there, and really did not do that bad. It just, it may not been the slider that he once used to possess, and not quite as sharp. Command and control wise, but he was still a competitive pitcher 4 years out of the game. So he was a pure pleasure to watch because of just the way he conducted himself on the mound, along with the powerful stuff. So it was a good career decision. I'll tell you, there's a side story to this when he got drafted. I want to say I started scouting in '79, and that's when we took Dave. Um, we used to have a combine with the San Diego Padres, and a couple clubs used to do it to like get more reports and kind of read up. And at that time, we weren't at full staff scouting wise. We were just putting together all our amateur staff. So
Right.
those extra reports, I think Pat found. Uh, uh, he's a purist, so he may not have thought so, but I think. uh, um, Anyways, so back then, naturally, you didn't have the computers, and we would have this three copies of all the reports. So the top report went to Toronto, the middle report went to San Diego, and you got to keep the third one for yourself. So uh, our area guy, as I said earlier, loved. His name was Don Wilken. He's passed away, but anyways, so Don really liked him as a center fielder. So Pat asked Al Lamacchia and Bobby Maddux to go in to see Dave Stieb play center field for Southern Illinois. So we didn't have a lot on him pitching wise. He dabbled in it at Southern Illinois. So they watched him play for 7 innings, and Carbondale's a little bit of a drive back to St. Louis. So they thought they had the picture on him as a center fielder. So they're leaving the ballpark, and the PA announcer, they're already outside the park, and the PA announcer says, and now pitching for the Salukis, Dave Stieb. Well, they turned around and came back in because they had seen he had a pretty good arm in center field. They came back in and saw Stieb pitch for 2 innings. There's some speculation. I don't know if it's true or false, but they had really great reports on Stieb as a pitcher. That second copy I was telling you about that should go to San Diego, I don't think either one of those made it to San Diego. So,
hence, saw something there.
Hence, in 1980, we broke up the combine with the Padres.
Yeah, right. Yeah, well, that would have been tough. Yeah, and you kind of bring me to something else. You know, I always heard stories about Hall of Famer Jim Palmer, you know, and growing up in Baltimore. I remember seeing him pitch as a kid. He was on the '83 World Series team, and I think he's the only guy still to this day that won a World Series game in 3 decades. He won in '66. Obviously, Baltimore was there a lot in the '70s. And then in '83, he was a reliever and won. But coming out as an amateur, and that would have been before your time as a scout or whatever, but he was a great athlete. He could have played basketball. He could have played baseball. And I think he could have played football. I think there were 3 sports in there that Palmer could have played. And then they drafted him, and he could have been a first or second round pick as a position player and obviously as a pitcher. Right? And he ended up being a pitcher. How do you differentiate with guys like Stieb, who, like, I'm an outfielder, but you think he's a pitcher, when someone's really good at both? Or, and now in today's game, people might say, well, what about Shohei Ohtani, where you can do both? But for a long time, we didn't allow them to do that.
No. I think probably, and it's been said on TV, the most notable guy is Babe Ruth, and that's
right.
only 70 years ago, so 80. But you know, I think Ohtani's a freak, and I don't know.
No other way to put it.
We're going to see that. That form or how he's doing it, to the way he's doing it, I don't think you're going to see that in quite some time. But it's certainly been fun to watch. You were talking about Jim Palmer in football. I believe he's signed out of a high school in the Phoenix area.
Yeah, Arizona area. Yep.
Yeah. And there's a plaque in there, and it said that he had played all 3 sports on that plaque at the Phoenix Muni Stadium, or one of the stadiums that paid tribute to Jim Palmer. But, yeah, a lot of cases, here's the thing: you see a lot of guys that are throwing hard today. The command and control is just fair. But if you got athletes like Palmer, Stieb, and we'll talk about Eichhorn in a little bit, that are good athletes, the one thing you can depend on, you don't know what their aptitude's going to be like in incorporating how to pitch, but you do know one thing for sure. If they show that they got the aptitude, they've got the body control to implement and be consistent. And it's a huge key. I mean, if you were to do degree of difficulty of delivery with that high leg kick that Palmer had, that might be a 9 on a 10 scale as far as degree of difficulty. But if he wasn't the athlete that he was, you give that to about 20 other pitchers, and 19 of them you might have to haul off to the hospital. I mean, that was an amazing leg kick that he had early in his career. And
well, and look, here's another topic that I want to bring up. Kind of, I think this is what the podcast is about, and I think that Major League Baseball, the baseball owners, made a mistake when they slotted the Major League Baseball draft. I don't think that, and this is my opinion, I don't think that baseball gets the superior athletes like they did, because guys like Palmer might go to the NBA. I think he said he liked basketball better than baseball. You know, what used to happen is that you'd buy those guys. Hey, baseball's a better, you're going to make more money, and it's right off the bat, you're getting paid more. You have to work harder to get to the big leagues, right? Because there are levels. I mean, you go to the NBA or you go to the NFL, I mean, you're right into the major sport. Then we slot at the draft, and you were part of signing Jeff Samardzija, who had a very solid career. He could have been maybe a second-round pick as a wide receiver at Notre Dame. Cubs buy him out of that, and he was like, what, fourth-round pick, but you paid him money to be a first-round pick. You can't do that anymore. And I feel like the level of athlete has diminished a lot because of the slotted draft. What's your opinion on that?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, we could probably go on and on forever.
That's just
a lot of instances of that, like what you brought up, Samardzija, and I talked to 3 NFL scouts or officials, and he had a chance to go to the end of the first round in the NFL draft or the beginning of the second round. And it was funny because it was, at that time, it was the Indianapolis Colts, Chris Polian, who was the son of the GM. I can't think of his first name now, but anyways, and talked to a scout with the Chicago Bears and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and 2 out of the 3 of them said that, and it shows you how they think, who the comp was for Samardzija in the NFL, and 2 of them said Joe Jurevicius, and that he might be even tougher than Jurevicius.
Right.
But it was funny how they think in similar mindset in their sport as we do in ours. But now I think that we are losing a fair amount of athletes, and it's unfortunate. I've got my personal reasons that how you could possibly change and get those guys back into it. I don't know if the draft, I doubt is going to go back to the way it used to be. But
the money's, I mean, look, they're saving money, right? So, I mean, I don't think they'll ever change it. I mean, once you kind of get that money back in your pocket, but Dick Groat passed away this last month, right? Two sports star, World Series champion, MVP with the Pirates, right? Loved basketball. He played for the Pistons back when they weren't even in Detroit yet.
Fort Wayne,
right?
Yeah.
The Fort Wayne Pistons, before my time. Said, I love basketball, but baseball was like Branch Rickey, told him, hey, man, we're going to pay you, you don't want to play that NBA stuff. Now I look at, Jameis Winston, who I broadcast one of his football games when he was in high school, loved baseball, but, went to football because I feel like there was a time where you could have probably paid him. You changed the whole thing, and then there's going to be guys like that. And I'll never forget talking with, and I'll probably talk about Gary Hughes every show because, I loved him so much. But also, I just learned so much about baseball and scouting from hanging out with him. And his formula started with finding great athletes, guys that could do stuff that doesn't necessarily mean that they were great on the baseball diamond when they were drafted. But he found great athletes and knew that they would develop into great baseball players. And to me, since the draft started to get, since they slotted it, when you get these superstar athletes, unless they love baseball, they might not love baseball. They just might be good at it. They're not going to play the game. And honestly, I feel like there has been a drop-off in the athlete that we see in the game.
Yeah, and I mean, it's showing out to be that way for the most part. So you don't hear of. I think even if the monies were there, I think it's become so orchestrated, and it's it's a real tough one to comment on because there's a lot of things that go into it, but
well, why did they do it in the first place? Did they feel like they weren't getting the value out of the money they were spending in the draft?
Well, I'm sure someone possibly convinced them to do so, and probably with what you alluded to earlier, as far as cost, that could have been part of it. I think we had been losing more and more athletes since basically the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of guys that were multi-sport guys were choosing the other sports over baseball.
Right.
Which, very unfortunate, but...
well, part of that, Tim, is that, baseball doesn't attract the black athlete right now. And that's a shame because, living in Fairhope, I'm right across the bay from Mobile, where Satchel Paige was from, Hank Aaron was from, Ozzie Smith was from, Stretch was from, Willie McCovey. And baseball has this issue where, those guys just don't want to play baseball. And it's a shame because you look at the history of the game. I mean, I grew up like I wanted to be Andre Dawson. I wanted to be Eddie Murray. I told you last year, I think I said every time I was up, I wanted to hit a home run like Reggie. The game misses those kind of guys.
Yeah, for sure. You brought up Andre Dawson, and I think originally he went to Southwest Miami High School and ended up going to Florida A&M on a football scholarship to play football. In today's world, I don't know what kind of football player he was.
Right.
But in today's world, we might have lost Andre Dawson.
How about that?
So, Marquis Grissom, same way.
Yeah,
so,
another great
Florida
one.
A&M.
Another guy I love to watch, Grissom, wearing the high socks. Look, there's a lot of great athletes that the game used to get that they don't get now. And I'm definitely curious to see how baseball works on that. And maybe it's a topic for next show. I think that the pitch clock helps a lot because the game's just so much faster now.
Yes.
But the money's a big part of it. I mean, if you have options and you like another sport better and it's a shorter route to playing in, their major league compared to what you have to do in baseball, just because there's so many skills that are involved in it, maybe you don't pick baseball. All right, well, let's talk about Mark Eichhorn, another one of these guys that the Blue Jays drafted, you were part of, and had a great big league career.
Probably one of my most fun players to talk about. He's still a good friend today, but it was my first year in scouting, and so I grew up under the tutelage of Wayne Morgan, and I talked about him in the last show. But we're kind of getting close to the draft that year in '79, and Mark went to a junior college, and he lived in Northern California out there, Cabrillo, I believe. And anyways, so we've got him under control in the draft. Wayne really liked him. I think Wayne had maybe caught an inning or two of him pitching, but he was a shortstop. Another very good athlete, very graceful style athlete. And,
at 6'4", 200.
Yeah, and he was every bit of 6'4", and he was really fun to watch, and he just loved it so much. And anyway, so I want to get into the part of it was going to be my first signing of a professional ball player, and Wayne Morgan was going to do all the negotiating and talking, and so Mark's father had a farm out in Northern California. There was a postal worker, and here we are. We're going to go be in my first signing ever. So we go into the house, Mr. Eichhorn, Mark, Wayne Morgan, and I'm the last one to go in the house. So as I go to step up to get into the house, I feel this excruciating pain in both of my right and left legs. I was wearing khaki pants, and they had these wild kittens that were there to get the mice and stuff, but about 4 of them had crawled on my legs, and as I go to sit down, I see I got blood on the back of both of my calves where the cats had dug in, and I'm trying not to let the Eichhorn see it because I didn't want to disrupt the signing.
Right.
So anyways,
but you've been attacked by one of their pets.
Yeah, about 4 of them. So
they
anyways,
use you as one of those little those things that they sharpen their claws with.
Yeah, the calves. So anyways, Wayne makes his offer. It was $12,500, and Mark's father stands up, and he says, "Can you answer this trivia question? If you can answer this trivia question, I'll let Mark sign." And it was the combination of 2 players that played in the same organization, total homers for a career. And this is '79. So naturally, a lot of people would say Lou Gehrig and Babe Ruth at that time.
What was the question now?
The 2 guys, same organization, that hit the most home runs for that organization.
Oh.
So
they came up like, can I get, let me guess. And this was the 70s? It would have been the Twins, right?
No.
No?
National League. I'll give you one more guess.
National League. Because I was thinking
you got to remember the one guy was retired and the other guy was just finishing up his career in the National League.
Oh, man. Maybe Eddie Matthews and Hank Aaron?
You got it. So Wayne, there you are. So anyways, Wayne's not big on trivia. So he throws his hands up in the air like this and goes, "I don't know." So Mark's father points over at me and he says, "Do you know?" And I says, "How about Hank Aaron and Eddie Matthews?"
Oh, boy, you got it.
And he gets up and he points right at me and he goes, "You're right." And then he points at Mark and he goes, "And you sign." And so, anyways, if speed forward in Mark's career,
That's
and
hilarious.
he
What if
gets
you'd
he
have got it
gets
wrong?
my
What if
first
you'd have got it
signing
wrong?
ever. I mean, I probably had a 50 to 100 after that, and didn't even come close. So,
Does that give you credibility when you sign someone? You probably need this as a scout early in your career. You got to have a win, right? You know, just like you go out and you get that win, and it's like, you know, like people are like, okay, yeah, Tim Wilken, I mean, he's going to be okay. You know, like, you know, you get a guy, he starts moving through the system, gets to the big leagues, because you're tied to that guy.
yeah, it does give credibility, but sometimes you can't see that process for 5-6 year period because of luck of the draft, things like that. And some guys, it takes a little bit longer for them to develop their game as a scout. So, but I'll finish the thing up with Eichhorn here real quick. So Mark is a traditional high 3/4 pitcher when he signed. Uh, he gets to the big leagues in about 2 years out of junior college and makes a few starts in the big leagues, and he hurts his arm. And he didn't throw a lot the next couple of years. And then all of a sudden he starts fiddling around with throwing submarine and sidearm. Well, he picks it up, and within he didn't qualify uh, as a rookie. He did qualify 3 years later when he came back as a submariner in the big leagues. That year, if you look it up, he pitched, I believe it was 157 and a third or 157 and 2/3. Has a ungodly year, finishes third in the Rookie of the Year award. Canseco had won it that year, and Wally Joyner finished second. I believe if he threw 4.1 innings more, 162 qualifies you for the ERA. He would have been the first reliever in Major League Baseball history to win the ERA title.
Wow.
That wasn't a starter, naturally. And went on to have a great career. Another one like Stieb, he stayed out of ball for about 3-4 years. Came back at the end of his career. Big family guy, chose to be with his family and stuff. And all of a sudden he develops his pitch just hanging around his house. And Mark had big hands. And he found this pitch he could control with his ring finger and his pinky, not his index finger or middle finger. He threw, and it was probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 45 to 55 miles an hour. And he goes to Dunedin, and then they jumped into Syracuse. I'm in Indianapolis, and he's striking out guys left and right. And Kevin Brown, the catcher, not the pitcher, that played a little bit in the big leagues. And Mark goes, I got a new pitch, Brownie. It's called The Thing, and you've got no chance. And it looked like a cartoon, how they swing and miss in the cartoons.
Right.
And it was so slow. And Gord Ash gives me a call that day in Indianapolis at the time. And he says, what do you think about Eichhorn? And I says, I think it's going to work. And what was funny is Gord's going to call him to the big leagues the next day. If you look at those numbers at Dunedin and Syracuse at the end of the year, tremendous numbers. He gets a call from his brother, and his brother was really sick. And he told Gord, he says, I can't go back to the big leagues. I got to go take care of my brother. And it showed you what kind of human being he was.
Really does.
But if you see those numbers, what was it, 2 walks and 25 punch outs?
Yeah, what year was that?
That was 99 or 2000.
99 or 2000. Yep, there it is. 1-0, .83 ERA, 2 walks and
he had this brand new pitch called The Thing, and it was.
Was it like a palm ball?
No, he just held it in his ring finger and his pinky. and I couldn't believe someone could control a ball like that.
That's crazy.
His hands were so big, and anyways, so Mark went to take care of his brother and never came back again. But tremendous athlete, I think, in 11 years in his career, especially from a submariner. He was such a great fielding pitcher. He made 2 errors in 11 years, and all those squib hits that you get off the bat, it kind of showed you what kind of athlete he was to repeat that delivery. And such a great fielding pitcher that he never got credit for.
We got to wrap it up. We got a couple minutes left, but you brought up a point that kind of reminds me of something that I said on the broadcast a couple of days ago. I was talking about the best fielding position player of all time. No one won more Gold Gloves than Greg Maddux. Is he the greatest position player of all time?
Well,
at his position?
Yeah. And if you're talking fielding and, what he did, I mean, they were showing highlights the other day of Maddux. And it was unbelievable, some of the plays he could make. Sometimes that's 2, 3, 4 outs a game.
Yep.
That might be base hits otherwise. And that's an inning and a third you don't even have to worry about because of the way he could defend.
He was talking to me one time. He was Jim Hendry's special assistant. He was hanging around the team. It was always just an honor to get to hang out with him, right? And you know how he is. I mean, he's definitely a character. One, he comes out of his shell. But he's also, at the same time, really funny guy, definitely a unique sense of humor, but he's also brilliant. And one of the things he told me was, he's like, I would basically tell the middle infielders, I got the middle, you worry about the sides. If it gets up the middle, that's on me. And just now that we have taken the shift out of the game again, and it wasn't, when he played, it wasn't part of the game really, that is so big. I mean, no wonder the guy won 350-some games. Yeah,
and naturally could dot you up anywhere in the zone, and quite incredible. And I knew the scout that signed him with the Cubs, and he did throw quite a bit harder when he was younger. He just started subtracting, and he didn't need to make all that effort. He was 93, 94 in high school. Wow. He was from, I believe, somewhere in Nevada. And, yep.
He was. I mean, look, the guy would, as a high schooler, would help pitch for his brother's college team. So we could talk about this, but look, Tim, the music means that this show is over, and it blew by. The MLB Baseball Scout podcast, guys, thank you for being a part of it. For Tim Wilken, I'm Mick Gillispie. Follow us on our YouTube channel, @Cubs Baseball Channel. That's where we're going to throw these shows. Also, wherever you get your podcasts, it'll be available there as well. We'll get together again real soon. If you have anything that you want to add, you want to ask Tim about, go ahead and throw that in the comment section. Great job, Tim. You got to go pick up a youngster.
Yeah, I got to walk down to school and pick him up. The eldest statesman of 8 years old.
All right, for Tim Wilken, I'm Mick Gillispie. Thanks for hanging out with us, guys. We'll do it again soon.